Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Deep in the Montana mountains, one man sought only silence and solitude until armed men arrived at his doorstep. What began as a quiet morning turned into a battle of land, power, and principle. They came to take what wasn't theirs. They didn't expect Dan Shaw. There's a particular kind of silence in the mountains that you don't find anywhere else. It's not empty. It's full of wind, of pine creeks, of birds shifting on the edges of branches. That kind of quiet hums in your bones like an old rifle strap pulling tight across your chest. That was the kind of morning it was, still and golden, with the first threads of sun slipping through the ridgeline when I stepped out on the porch, coffee steaming in my left hand, .308 bolt action over my right shoulder like most folks wear. Bathrobes. I'd already taken the dogs out, fed the hens, and started the fire in the forge. I live by rhythm, not clock. 50 acres of hard-earned peace, 3 miles from the paved road, and a good 15 from the HOA line, or so I thought. The first thing I noticed was the sound. Tires on gravel that wasn't supposed to have any traffic but mine. That low crunch, deliberate, slow. I set my coffee down on the rail and stepped to the edge, squinting down into the hollow. There, emerging like wolves from the tree line, were 2 SUVs, blacked out, both too clean for mountain roads. They didn't bounce like locals. They glided like they were trained to. 6 men climbed out, not local handymen, not utility workers. These boys looked like gym memberships held together with tactical vests. One had a crowbar, another had a clipboard. One was already looking up at the house through a pair of aviators like he was casing it for a hit. They didn't knock. They didn't wave. They just started walking. I've seen enough of that type. In the military, we had a name for them, contracted confidence, the kind of men who get paid not to ask questions. The lead guy, bald, tattooed neck, arm veins like cables, had something tucked at his side that looked suspiciously like a taser. That's when I stepped back inside, calm as ice, and opened the hidden drawer beneath the bench. The rifle I chose wasn't for show. It was my preferred elk gun, good for quiet intimidation at distance. I moved behind the cabin, circled low through the tall grass, and came up behind the cedar woodpile that faced the path leading to my main gate. I had full line of sight when the first one came into range. "Gentlemen," I called, low and steady, voice amplified by the slope, "I'd rethink your approach." They stopped, most of them anyway. One reached for something at his belt. I chambered around, not fired, not yet, but loud enough to let them know it was real. "Back up 10 paces. Now." The sound of a bolt sliding into position changes a man's attitude real quick. They froze. I didn't see fear. Yet. Just confusion, cockiness, thinning out like breath on cold air. "Who sent you?" I asked. "We're here on behalf of Eagle Ridge HOA, the bald one finally replied, raising his hands halfway. "This property's in violation of structural codes. We're authorized to inspect." "This land isn't in your jurisdiction," I snapped. "And you're armed, on private ground, with no notice, no warrant. That makes you 6 felons and me a very awake landowner with legal standing and plenty of ammo." One of them took a step back. The crowbar guy looked visibly rattled. I stepped out slowly, weapon lowered, but visible. "Drop what's in your hands." "Step away from my fence line. Now." The 3 in front complied. The other 3 hung back, unsure. I made my way to them slowly, careful, rifle ready, but not raised. I didn't want a firefight, just clarity. I disarmed one. He had pepper spray, a baton, a body camera strapped on his vest. Professional gear, too professional. "You want to call it in? Do it now," I told him. "Police, lawyer, HOA, whoever gave you the job. But you're leaving today." After a tense minute, they started to back away, heading to their SUVs in silence. One glanced back like he wanted to say something, but thought better of it. When they were far enough down the ridge, I hit the panic switch hidden in the shed, triggering the surveillance system to lock down and start live recording. Then I picked up my cell and called the sheriff's department. I didn't shout. I didn't dramatize. I just told the dispatcher exactly what happened, what I had on video, and that I'd like to press charges for armed trespassing and attempted intimidation. And then I waited. They didn't know it yet, but that was the last time anyone from Eagle Ridge HOA would ever send someone onto my land without paperwork, without a warning, and without understanding exactly who they were dealing with. The sheriff showed up in less than 30 minutes, which around here counts as record time. I'd barely had a chance to make a second pot of coffee before I saw the cruiser snaking its way up my drive, tires grinding over the gravel like a lazy saw blade. Deputy Fallon stepped out first. Young guy, maybe early 30s, sharp eyes, but a little too polite for his own safety. Behind him was Sergeant Willis, grizzled, sun-baked, and already frowning before he even got out of the vehicle. I'd known Willis for years. He was the type who didn't like surprises, and I was about to give him a hell of one. I greeted them calmly, showed them where the SUVs had been parked, and pointed out the tire tracks heading back toward the tree line. They came from the eastern woods, I said, not the road, which tells me they didn't want to be seen. Fallon took notes while Willis just looked at me, arms crossed, waiting for the part he knew was coming. I've got it all on video, I said, leading them inside. The cabin's security hub is wired tight. 4 camera angles, high-resolution infrared backup. I pulled up the footage from 20 minutes before they'd arrived. It played like a B-grade militia thriller. 6 men, tactical gear, spreading out across my yard like they were planning to breach the perimeter of a cartel ranch. When the sound of my rifle echoed in the audio, Fallon flinched. Willis didn't. "You didn't shoot at them?" Fallon asked, half expecting trouble. "I fired over their heads. Didn't touch a single one." Willis nodded slowly. "And you detained some of them?" 3. Disarmed them, kept it clean. No one was injured. They left under their own power. Willis sighed. "That's going to be messy." He asked for copies of the footage. I burned it onto a USB and handed it over. That's when Fallon said the thing that shifted the whole conversation. "One of the men came in half an hour ago, said he was assaulted during a sanctioned inspection, claimed to be acting under the authority of Eagle Ridge HOA. I laughed, not politely. Assaulted? He trespassed armed with 5 other men dressed like mercenaries. That's not an inspection, that's an organized intimidation stunt." Willis didn't argue. He just rubbed his eyes like the migraine had already arrived. "We'll need statements. From you. From them. You're lucky it didn't escalate. Lucky no one pulled a trigger." "Wasn't luck," I replied. "I've pulled triggers for a living. I chose not to." While they took my statement, I got a text from my buddy Ron Hayes. Used to be my CO. Now he wears a suit and works with the county prosecutor's office. I'd messaged him an hour earlier, just a heads up. His reply was short but promising. "I'm coming up. Don't talk to anyone else till I get there." Willis wrapped up the paperwork and promised to contact me once the other parties had been questioned. "If this firm's working for HOA," he said, "we're going to have to figure out who authorized what. Private security isn't supposed to operate like this." I watched the patrol car disappear down the ridge and stood for a long time with my arms folded across my chest. I wasn't angry, not yet, but the weight in my gut was familiar, same as it had been overseas, when a plan you thought was solid suddenly reeked of something rotten behind the curtain. Later that afternoon, I dug deeper into the names. I searched the so-called Eagle Ridge Safety and Compliance Services online. They didn't have a website, just a P.O. box, a burner number, and a single state business registration tied to a woman named Emily V. Grant. That name didn't mean much until I checked the HOA board records I'd kept from their earlier campaigns to pressure me into joining. The treasurer of Eagle Ridge HOA was one Emily Vander Grant, full name, Emily Vanderwood Grant, Karen Vander's niece. I sat back, let that sink in. So the compliance company wasn't just a rogue contractor. They were a family shell firm tied directly to the HOA's leadership. I texted Ron again. The company's a front, registered to Karen's niece. This wasn't rogue. This was planned. His reply came less than a minute later. "On it. Send documents. I'll pull financials." I didn't need to wait for a courtroom to know this was no longer about some overzealous HOA president throwing her weight around. This was coordinated, funded, and masked with just enough bureaucracy to make them think they could get away with it. They'd picked the wrong man. Ron arrived the next morning in a beat-up government SUV that looked like it had survived 3 budget cuts and a flood. He was still built like a soldier, despite the shirt and tie, square jaw, eyes that scanned constantly, and the same deliberate gait I remembered from the desert. He didn't shake hands, just nodded once and walked straight into the cabin like he still had rank. "I brought a laptop," he said, dropping a satchel on the kitchen table. "You're going to want to see what's in these files." I poured him coffee while he booted up. No small talk. We both knew the tempo. These guys, Eagle Ridge Safety and Compliance, they've received over $75,000 from the HOA in the last fiscal year. That's more than they spent on landscaping, road maintenance, and utilities combined. and the payments are categorized under community stabilization. He gave me a pointed look. That's not just shady. That's a fraud scheme waiting to blow. He clicked through PDFs, expense ledgers, check images, transfers from HOA funds into the account of ERSCLLC with memos like Security Survey and Perimeter Integrity Patrol. They've been planning this for months, Ron continued. All payments signed off by Karen V., HOA President, and Emily G., Acting Treasurer. No other board signatures. That's against their own charter. I leaned in. You think they'll fold under pressure? Not yet. But if we build the right pressure, internal and public, they'll crack. I spent the next hour helping Ron organize every record I'd kept. The cease and desist letters I got last year, the HOA meeting minutes where they proposed border reviews, the neighbor complaints with eerily similar phrasing, and, most damning, printouts from my trail cams showing the same SUV parked just outside my eastern tree line on 2 previous weekends. Surveillance dry runs. Ron brought in a private investigator from Billings, a former detective named Clara Lopez. She moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had put far too many dirty city council members in handcuffs. Her first move? Interview the residents of Eagle Ridge. By the end of the week, we had 3 neighbors willing to give anonymous statements. One said Karen had been bragging during a wine night that she'd finally found a way to deal with the woodsman problem. Another claimed Karen pressured them to sign a letter complaining about constant rifle fire and barking dogs on adjacent land, my land. A third gave us something better, a forwarded email from Karen, no less. Subject: pre-compliance action. Content: this will look like an inspection. Keep your mouth shut and it all goes away. Clara dug further. Turns out, ERSC wasn't just a shell company. They had employees, contracted muscle, who also worked part-time as security for HOA events. She pulled mugshots on 2 of the men who came onto my property. One had been dishonorably discharged for aggression during civilian engagement. The other had served prison time for assault. Background checks nobody in the HOA ever ran or cared to. We gathered everything: financial records, altered inspection notices, security rosters, and statements from residents. All of it pointed to the same conclusion. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a coordinated campaign of coercion and fear, backed by HOA funds and masked as compliance. I asked Clara what the goal could be. Why target me so forcefully? She just stared at the map for a while before pointing to the southern edge of my property. Because of this, she said, you own the only uninterrupted land between the current HOA and the lakeside parcel they've been courting for development. They want a road, a straight shot, and your land's in the way. The puzzle finally clicked. It had never been about noise complaints or fence lines or property values. It had been about expansion, a development scheme, a pipeline project wrapped in bureaucracy. My land stood between them and profit. They thought I'd be the weak link, that I'd fold under pressure or sell quietly like the last 3 holdouts. What they hadn't counted on was someone who wasn't afraid of darkness, lawyers, or bullies with clipboards. That night, I wrote up a full incident summary with attached exhibits and emailed it to every member of the county commission, the local news editor, and the state attorney general's public complaint portal. Then I went outside, stood in the dark with a beer in hand, and looked out at the forest beyond. My land wasn't just soil and trees, it was a wall, and I had just started building my defense. By the end of that week, the silence around Eagle Ridge broke. The emails I'd sent out did their job. A reporter from the local Gazette called me directly, a young guy named Owen Byrne, with a voice too eager and questions too careful. He asked if I was willing to go on record. I told him, you can use my name, my video, and the damn coordinates of every screw those bastards tried to plant in my fence posts. Just tell it straight. The next morning, the headline ran bold across the local paper and its website. Hunter claims HOA organized armed raid to force land. Surrender, county investigates. There were screenshots from the surveillance footage, quotes for my statement, and, most damning, an attached document trail showing HOA money funneled into a company linked to Karen's family. It spread fast. I'm not one for social media, but even I got texts from former Army buddies, old hunting partners, hell, even my ex-wife, who apparently saw it while scrolling and messaged, Dan, what the hell kind of trouble did you rope the HOA into? But that spotlight came with heat. That same afternoon, a black Escalade pulled into my lower trail, far too smooth for someone coming to apologize. Out stepped Karen Vander, dressed like she'd been torn between a yoga retreat and a courtroom. White pantsuit, oversized sunglasses, clipboard in hand. Her mouth twisted into a smile so fake it should have had a barcode. "You've created quite the stir, Mr. Shaw," she called out as she stepped into view of my porch. "This media circus, this paranoid spectacle, you're making things very difficult for a lot of good people." I didn't answer, just stood with my arms crossed, watching her shift uncomfortably under the weight of my silence. "You know," she continued, "I could have had the board file a restraining order. This smear campaign you're orchestrating, it's reckless, dangerous. I was advised not to come here in person, but I believe in community resolution. You call 6 armed men breaking onto private property community resolution." She flinched, just slightly. "They were contracted for inspection. You signed off on the funding. They were acting independently. They had documents with HOA headers." She paused, gathering herself. "This can all go away," she said, tone sharpening. "We can pay for damages, issue a formal apology, quietly close the matter, but if you continue pursuing this path, well, I've spoken to legal counsel. Defamation is actionable." "Then sue me," I replied. "But you better bring a bigger team than last time." Karen's smile broke. Just a flicker, like a crack in porcelain. She stepped back, adjusted her purse, and said, "This will get worse before it gets better, Mr. Shaw. I hope you're prepared for what that means." Then she left. Within 24 hours, it started. A white envelope landed in my mailbox, marked with a red HOA stamp. Inside were formal allegations, violations for unregistered livestock, unauthorized fencing, visual pollution, and unsafe firearm storage. All nonsense, all outside their jurisdiction. But they filed it anyway and CC'd the local building inspector. The very next morning, 2 city trucks pulled up at the base of my trail. Out stepped 3 clipboard men and 1 building official with a badge I hadn't seen before. "We received multiple anonymous complaints," he said, not meeting my eyes. "We're obligated to verify structures for code compliance." "You got a warrant?" I asked. He hesitated. "No, sir. But if you deny access, we'll have to file non-compliance reports and issue citations pending inspection." "Do what you need to," I said. "But this is private land, not under HOA code, and I'm not letting anyone on the property without legal authority." They left, angrily, but I had the entire exchange recorded from the porch cam. I called my lawyer, Lyle Chester, and forwarded the footage. "They're panicking," he said. "And panicked bureaucrats make stupid mistakes. This isn't about code. This is about pressure. They're hoping to drown you in legal mud before you make it to court." Later that night, Clara sent me photos. 2 of the HOA board members, Peter and Lenore, were seen having dinner with Karen and someone from a local law firm known for aggressive HOA representation. One of them, she said, had already made inquiries into my ownership deed. They were looking for weaknesses, any loophole, any clause. They didn't find one, but they tried. 3 days later, I woke up to a trail camera alert. I checked the feed and saw a man, tall, hoodie, night vision headgear, crawling across the northern perimeter of my fence line with a camera and measuring tape. I watched him count steps, take photos, then disappear back into the woods. That was the last straw. I compiled the footage, sent it to Ron and Lyle, and filed a direct motion requesting an injunction, restraining order against HOA surveillance or physical approach to my property pending trial. Lyle filed the motion before lunch. Judge Marnell approved it by 4. That evening, I sat on my porch with a scoped rifle across my lap. Not aimed, just resting, just watching, letting the camera catch it too. If they wanted to play intimidation games, they weren't the only ones who knew how to send a message without firing a shot. The injunction slowed them down, but it didn't stop them. Like a wounded animal, the HOA wasn't retreating. It was cornered and snapping harder. Clara warned me this would happen. People like Karen don't just give up power. They suffocate in silence, then come back louder. On Monday morning, my lawyer Lyle called. His voice was more gravel than usual. "They've filed a countersuit." I didn't respond right away. I was standing out by the smoker, prepping venison I'd cured myself, listening to elk bugling on the ridge. There's something obscene about hearing legal threats while elbow deep in primal simplicity. "For what?" I finally asked. Defamation, disruption of community harmony, emotional distress, basically every fluffy term you can print on HOA stationery. Let them try. I've got evidence stacked to the ceiling. Lyle grunted. I'm not worried about losing. I'm worried about them stalling. They want to bleed you dry with paperwork, motions, delays. Standard HOA tactic, death by process. I exhaled slowly. I'd seen insurgents play this same game in other countries. If you can't win the fight, bury your enemy in bureaucracy. But I wasn't alone anymore. The exposure had done something unexpected. Neighbors, people I'd barely spoken to before, all started reaching out. Some in secret, some openly. It was like the spell had broken. The fear that Karen and her clique had held over that neighborhood for years was cracking. One guy, Martin Kell, came by in person. Gray beard, quiet demeanor, wore flannel like a second skin. I've lived in Eagle Ridge since it was built, he said. Karen came in 5 years ago like a new sheriff. Fines for holiday lights. Threats over yard gnomes. My wife got a citation for planting wildflowers. Wildflowers. He handed me a flash drive. I saved everything. Letters, emails, even a video from a board meeting where she told us that people like Dan Shaw need to be kept in line. I figured you'd make better use of it than I ever could. That wasn't the only one. Clara gathered testimonies from 7 more residents. One was a single mother, fined over $500 for leaving her trash cans out after surgery. Another was an older couple threatened with foreclosure over paint color. A third, shockingly, had been told to sign a complaint against me or risk review of their property file. Lyle smiled grimly when I brought it all in. This isn't a lawsuit anymore. This is a class action waiting to happen. We adjusted course. Instead of fighting defensively, we went nuclear. I filed an official civil lawsuit against Karen Vander and Eagle Ridge HOA for criminal trespass, organized harassment, abuse of regulatory power, fraudulent accounting, and attempted coercion to sell land under duress. Ron helped draft the wording. Clara delivered subpoenas. Lyle filed motions to unseal HOA's private spending records. We attached neighbor testimonies, signed under oath. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about a pattern. And then came the break we didn't expect. One of the 6 men from the original inspection team flipped. His name was Marcus Willard, late 30s, lots of tattoos, one too many bad decisions, but apparently enough common sense left to realize he'd been used. His lawyer reached out, said Marcus wanted to talk. In exchange for immunity from further charges, he'd testify. Lyle and Ron took the meeting. Marcus confirmed it all. Karen had called him personally, told him and 5 others they'd be doing physical compliance enforcement, not inspections. Promised cash under the table plus bonuses if they got results. She provided maps, false HOA letters, even fake ID badges. When one of the guys asked if they needed permits, she told them it was all community sanctioned, and then he dropped the bomb. The real reason behind the attack wasn't just my land, it was the lakeside deal. Karen and 2 other board members had been in talks with a commercial real estate firm. They wanted to develop a stretch of resort housing around the lake and needed access. My property stood directly in their way. They couldn't buy it, so they planned to force it. We were told to make you uncomfortable, Marcus admitted, scare you into leaving or selling. The statement was notarized, transcribed, and filed within 24 hours. Ron brought it straight to the county DA. A criminal investigation into Karen Vander was open that same week. Now they were on the run. Karen tried to host a private HOA board meeting that Friday. Half the neighborhood showed up and refused to leave. A vote was called to suspend her leadership temporarily pending review. She refused, so they did it anyway. Then, as if the story needed gasoline, Owen from the Gazette published a full exposé. Power, Profit, and Persecution, how one HOA tried to bulldoze a Montana veteran. I saw the print edition on the diner counter 2 days later. My name was on the cover. I didn't like the attention, but I understood its value. This wasn't just a personal war anymore. It was a message. If you build your home with your hands, if you keep to your own land, if you ask for nothing but silence and sky, no one has the right to invade that. And if they try, well, they better have better men than last time. The day the DA's office officially filed charges against Karen Vander, the wind shifted. Not literally, it was still cold and dry up in the ridgeline, but metaphorically, I could smell it. The silence from Eagle Ridge had turned from smugness to static. the kind of buzzing tension that precedes either a storm or a reckoning. Ron called first thing in the morning. Warrant issued. 2 counts. Abuse of authority and conspiracy to commit fraud. She hasn't been arrested yet. They're giving her the chance to turn herself in. She won't, I said flatly. She'll run. She'll try to spin. And she did. 2 days later, the HOA sent out a mass email. It was full of hollow language, unfortunate misunderstandings, temporary leave of absence, dedicated years of service. But the interesting part wasn't the wording. It was the silence from her inner circle. The other board members didn't co-sign it. Not this time. Meanwhile, Lyle kept piling the paperwork. He subpoenaed the HOA's internal emails and financial logs, and what we uncovered was worse than we'd guessed. Karen had approved not just 1 but 3 covert operations labeled as private security audits over the past 6 months, 2 of which involved tailing me during hunting trips. Let me repeat that. They paid contractors to track me through my own damn forest, to record where I camped, where I walked. 1 log entry included the phrase, "Subject observed returning with untagged kill, possible poaching." That wasn't just invasive. That was dangerous. Accusations like that could cost me my license, my guns, and my reputation in the state. I was done reacting. That afternoon, I walked into the sheriff's department and gave an official statement about stalking, with attached trail cam footage, drone logs from Clara's team, and copies of the emails. Sheriff Holder, a big man who once wrote me up for fishing without a secondary tag, looked me in the eye and said, "You should have come in sooner." I stared back. I was trying to handle it like a neighbor. He nodded. Not anymore. That same week, 3 HOA members resigned, publicly. 1 even did a short interview with Owen from the Gazette, admitting that Karen had pressured them into signing off on checks they didn't understand, and threatened expulsion from the board if they asked too many questions. And then it happened. The court date was finally scheduled. The county clerk confirmed a preliminary hearing in 6 weeks. We were officially headed to trial. With everything snowballing, Clara suggested we stay ahead of public opinion. "Hold a town hall," she said, "on your land. Invite the press, the locals, the board members. Show them this isn't about spite. It's about rights." So we did. That Saturday, I cleared space near the edge of my property, built a wide fire pit, set up hay bales for seating, and invited every soul within a 10-mile radius. Over 60 people showed up. Some brought kids. Others brought questions. Most brought stories. I stood under a pine tree, hands in my pockets, and told the whole thing. Not like a politician, not with big words. Just the truth, 1 line at a time. I showed the footage, read from the emails, held up the inspection violation forms Karen sent me. I told them I didn't want to lead anything. I didn't want to be a hero. I just wanted to be left the hell alone. But if someone came for your land, your peace, your silence, they'd come for mine too. And that's where I drew the line. People applauded. I hated that part, but I understood it. Later that night, a young man came up to me quietly. Said he was a new homeowner, just bought in Eagle Ridge 6 months ago. He looked nervous. "She visited my house, you know," he said. "Karen, back in spring, told me you were unstable, that I should keep my kid away from your property, that you kept traps in the woods." I didn't speak. He held out a folded paper. "She gave me this, asked me to sign it." It was a pre-written complaint about aggressive wildlife management on my land, completely fabricated. Never filed, but printed, signed, dated. I added it to the pile. By now, I had enough testimony to bury the entire HOA in paperwork, but it wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about precedent. Because if 1 HOA in Montana could do this, then so could 50 more across the country. And if nobody stood up to them, they'd win by default, not because they were right, but because most folks were too tired, too scared, or too alone to fight. When the trial finally began, the courtroom wasn't just full. It was practically a fire hazard. Locals squeezed into the back rows, reporters leaned against the walls, and a camera crew from a national outlet sat shoulder to shoulder with Owen from the Gazette, whose once small-town curiosity had ballooned into full-blown investigative and obsession. They all came to see if the story was true, if a homeowners association really tried to run a veteran off his own land. Karen Vander arrived dressed for battle, power suit, pearl earrings, smile like she'd been coached to look misunderstood. Her new lawyer, sleek, sharp, all gel and attitude, walked in like he was auditioning for a courtroom drama. They thought this would be a quick spin job. They underestimated Lyle. Opening statements were surgical. Lyle laid it out like a hunting map. This was a story of abuse, deception, targeted harassment, and ultimately attempted coercion masked as policy. Karen's team tried to counter by framing me as an uncooperative landowner, someone who had isolated himself and refused peaceful regulation. But they had no idea what we were about to unload. We started with the footage. The court went dead silent as video played of the 6 hired men emerging from the tree line, moving in formation toward my house. The timestamp, the weapons, the equipment, it all spoke louder than words. Then came the audio, my voice warning them off, the clicks of safeties disengaging, and the crack of a warning shot over their heads. Then Lyle brought up Marcus. In his testimony, Marcus didn't flinch. He explained how they were hired, by whom, and for what. He told the court exactly what Karen said, how she laughed when someone asked about legal paperwork, and how she referred to my property as a tactical blind spot that needed to be neutralized. His words. Karen's lawyer objected 5 times during his testimony, overruled every single one. Then came the financial records. Lyle revealed 3 hidden accounts used by the HOA to fund security inspections, with checks signed by Karen herself. He brought in one of the board's own treasurers, recently resigned, who testified under oath that they'd been pressured to approve expenses without explanation. They feared retaliation if they didn't. And then Clara delivered the final blow. She presented a stack of signed statements from residents, dozens of them, describing years of intimidation, threats over lawn length, fines for invisible infractions, demands to spy on neighbors, forced complaints. One woman, nearly in tears, told the court that Karen had threatened to foreclose on her house over a political sign in the window. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about a reign of control collapsing under its own weight. Karen's defense crumbled. They scrambled to claim miscommunication, overzealous actions, rogue contractors. But by day 3, no one was buying it. The jury could smell the rot. On the 4th day, Karen took the stand. Her voice was calm, her smile steady, but her eyes darted like a cornered animal. She denied knowing the full extent of the operations. She said she trusted her team. She said she'd never wanted things to escalate. Then Lyle stood. He pulled out one last piece of paper, a printed email from Karen to her board dated 3 weeks before the raid. The subject line, "Push him out before winter." She froze. He read the body of the email aloud. "We either break him now, or we'll be dealing with his nonsense for another year. I don't care what it takes. Get him scared. Make him sweat." Gasps broke through the courtroom. Karen's attorney turned to her with eyes wide, whispering something that clearly wasn't part of the plan. The judge called for order twice before things settled. The prosecution rested. The defense gave up its rebuttal the next morning. All that was left was the verdict. The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. They returned with their decision. Guilty on all counts: intentional harassment, abuse of position, conspiracy, and defamation. Karen Vander was sentenced to 6 months probation, a 6-figure personal fine, and a permanent bar from holding any HOA-related leadership position ever again. The Eagle Ridge HOA itself was ordered to pay me $2.5 million in damages and $1 million in community restitution to be used toward rebuilding local trust initiatives. The judge didn't mince words. "You weaponized bureaucracy. You twisted community governance into a tool of fear, and you underestimated the wrong man." Reporters chased me down outside the courthouse. I kept it short. "I didn't win today," I said. "The law did. I just held the line." And then I went home. The property was still there, the ridgeline still quiet. The elk still roamed near the lower tree line, but it felt different now. Not because anything changed, but because everything tried to change it, and failed. Spring came late to the mountains that year. Snow lingered on the higher peaks, but the valley floor had already begun to green. I was out early, hammering the last cedar plank onto a new signpost I'd built by the gravel drive. The letters were hand-carved, deep and deliberate. "This is free land, governed by law, not fear." The sun hadn't fully risen when I stepped back to admire it. Just enough light filtered through the pines to catch the grain. Behind me, my cabin stood the same as it always had. Wood smoke curling from the chimney, my dog Buck stretched across the porch, but everything else felt changed. I wasn't a hermit anymore, at least, not entirely. Since the trial, folks started coming around, not in droves, not with casseroles or awkward thank yous, but with questions. Real ones. About property rights, about standing your ground, about how to read a deed or file a restraining order without getting buried in paperwork. Some just wanted to learn how to shoot a rifle without flinching. Others wanted to teach their kids how to build a fire. So I built something. Where the old storage barn used to be, I put up a new longhouse-style shelter, open walls, benches along the sides, a potbelly stove in the middle. Nothing fancy, but it held heat. I called it the Ridge House. Clara helped set up a nonprofit under the same name. Ron provided legal advice pro bono. Lyle, surprisingly, even showed up to give a talk on local codes and how to fight back if a neighbor tries to rewrite them behind your back. We hosted our first survival course on the second Saturday of May. 23 people showed up, ranchers, single moms, veterans, teenagers. We didn't talk about Karen or the HOA. We talked about water filtration, defensive posture, how to tell if you're being followed. We roasted elk, made coffee in a tin pot, passed around a single flashlight when night fell and kept talking by firelight. And I realized something. When they came for me, they didn't just want my land. They wanted silence, compliance, obedience. But the thing about living in the wilderness is that you learn early. Nothing truly wild ever surrenders easy. Not without blood, not without noise. Karen moved out of state. I heard she tried to join another HOA board in Arizona, but her name was flagged. Turns out a felony-level fraud charge and half a dozen civil suits tend to follow you. Last I heard, she was renting a condo near Flagstaff and writing letters to the editor about toxic veterans. Eagle Ridge held new elections. The new board was tolerable, humble, transparent for now. They reduced their bylaws by half and scrapped most of the overreach. Nobody replaced Karen's ornamental bench at the community park. A small gesture, but it said enough. As for me, I still keep to myself. But now, when someone knocks on the gate, it's usually not to find me or tell me what color I can paint my shed. It's someone asking how to build something of their own, how to keep it, how to fight for it. And I tell them the same thing, every time. You don't need a lawyer first. You need a spine, a shovel, a record of everything. And if that fails, you need to remember that you're not alone, even when they try to make you feel like you are. Because there are still places out there where a man can defend what's his. Still places where the law means more than signatures on fake letters or threats scrawled on HOA letterhead. Still places where the wind carries more than fear. This is one of them. And as long as I'm standing here, it's going to stay that way.